some spawning circles, and then they take off. So kind of fun. And I do have, there's a researcher at Pepperdine University who works on these guys and has for many years, and she's made a little, kind of like a 20-minute, 25-minute video all about California drainage. So if I get a chance, if you have some time, I'll show it to you guys. Okay, as I mentioned, there are some fishes that make more of a nest. Okay, so the ones that, the previous one is, they're benthic, but they kind of take off. They don't actually care for them. Then there are the garters, nest garters. So these are also benthic spawners. They stick their eggs into some nest that they've built, and then they guard them and will protect them. These little buggers are some of the biggest defenders of their territory. Anyone know what fish this is? It's your state marine fish, so you should know it. The Garibaldi. They're super annoying. And they are protected by virtue of being the state marine fish, but sometimes you really want to just because they are highly territorial. And so they build these nests, and their nests usually consist of algae. So they actually kind of like they're almost like little farmers. They'll tend to some algae that they then later will lay the eggs in. And the males typically will defend them very rigorously. These fish, well, they can get up to about maybe yay big, right? Somewhere between here and here. They look pretty inconsequential. I've been bit by them so many times. If you get in their area, they are not shy, even though I'm a lot bigger than you. Why are you biting my head? But they will. So they're very territorial. So I just myself this. I went off script. But Garibaldi's a good example. There are some that will hold eggs within their mouths, so they're called mouth brooders or bearers. This is pretty common. If any of you have had aquaria and dealt with cichlids, there's several cichlid species. Anyone ever had cichlids? They're a fairly common aquarium species. So. It's pretty cool. And there are some marine species that do it as well. Cichlids are freshwater, but and they'll actually hold the eggs in their mouths. It's often the males that have them in their mouths. They'll sometimes try. It varies though. Some of them, there are some where it's females, but usually it's often the males. So by doing so, it's sort of cool in a way. By doing so, they can obviously stay protected. And then they can periodically sort of open their mouths and aerate them and keep them kind of clean. Because that's another issue with those that lay them in a nest. They have to clean them because they can get covered in bacteria or algae or sediment. And so you'll see sometimes fish will actually fan them with their fins to clean them off. And so it does take some work. In this case, they sort of avoid some of that. They can just sort of like gulp their mouths open to aerate them. But what are they not able to do much of during that time? Yeah, they can't eat much. So it's tricky in that regard. So there's definitely pluses and minuses to all of these strategies, as you can probably see. So another one that has a bear or brood on their body is a seahorse. Okay, and as probably a lot of you know, the males are actually the ones that hold the babies in the pouch. So how cute is that? There's two babies right there. So the males brood them. They're transferred over. The eggs are transferred in there from the female and fertilized within the pouch, and then born out as basically fully functional little mini adults. So that's one other strategy. Pike fishes that are very closely related to seahorses do a similar thing. They do have a pouch, but some of them will actually also just be along the tail end. And then obviously there's another example of mouth breather. Okay, the other cool aspect to fishery production is that they're very labile with respect to gender or sex identification. So hermaphroditism in fishes is quite common. And you can have sort of, again, a spectrum of hermaphroditism, which can include just totally separate sexes, okay, which is we talked about. Then you can have synchronous hermaphroditism, or it's often termed, another term that's commonly used is simultaneous hermaphroditism, which I actually tend to use more. This is Dawn written this up. Which means that you have both gonads at the same time. So you have both ovary and testes at the same time. Okay. Doesn't mean you necessarily use them at the same time. And usually fish will sort of alternate their use depending on their spawning situations. The big advantage to being a hermaphrodite is that you can potentially mate with any other individual that you meet up with. Instead of like, oh, there's a female, okay, I gotta go find a male. So you can actually mate with anyone that you come in contact with. Doesn't mean that they necessarily do. There is some choice involved, but if you are, for example, a deep sea fish, pretty good strategy when you're in a sparse, vast area. It's probably good to be hermaphroditic, so that if you do find a mate, a congener or conspecific, I mean, you have the potential to mate with them. It's hard to find a mate. And then there are a lot of both. We have some local species here, as well as a lot of tropical species are hermaphroditic. So hamlets are kind of a classic example over there. And then the other type of hermaphroditism is called sequential hermaphroditism, where you start out in life as one sex and you change to the other later on. So if you go female to male, that is called protogeny. So protogynous. Proto means what? First. First. Gyne? Female. Female. So your first female, okay? Versus male to female, protandry or protandrous. Okay, so first male. Clownfish are an example of a protandrous, which is a little less common. It's more common to be protogynous, meaning female to male. Protandrous is a little bit less common, but you just say that with clownfish. So Nemo was a sex changer. Yeah.
For the synchronous ones, can one's own sperm fertilize one's own egg?
In theory, yes. Not for all species. I know that there's some that have been tested and it doesn't always work. Like there's often reproductive failure. It can happen though, but usually it's only been shown, or most often it's been shown in sort of lab situations, but in the field, typically they don't self-fertilize, most species. And they will outcrop spawn with another individual. So it's not super common for them to do that naturally. But yes, it could happen. Here's a nice local example, and one of my favorites, which is the California sheephead, the fish I work on. So they're a sequential hermaphrodite, protogynous. So all individuals are born and mature as females. Some of them, but not all, will later in life, and it's usually size dependent and social hierarchy dependent. So there's a lot of social aspects that go into the decision to change sex in many of these species. Larger females and somewhat dominant females will typically be the ones that will become males. Larger males then do have more success mating females. So they actually mate, the way they mate is that a male will sort of, will have a bit of a territory, okay, and will try to monopolize females in his area. And so it's not truly a harem, in that the females don't just stay with him all the time, but he will mate with multiple females on a particular evening, okay, one at a time. So it's not a group spawning thing, but he'll sort of monopolize an area, have a territory, the females will sort of come by, and he'll court and mate with each of them over the course of an hour or two. Okay, and then protandry, larger females in fishes produce a lot more eggs than small fishes. So if you're female, it's advantageous to be big. We often, in the sort of fishing world, we call them boffs, which are big old fecund females. Okay. So in both cases, when a large individual dies, usually the next largest will be the one to replace it and change sex. All right, so if we take the clownfish as an example, so if a female dies, so again, remember these are protandrous, so the older, larger individuals are the females. Okay? So you also tend to have a sex ratio skew in sex-changing fishes, right? You're going to have more individuals of the sex, the initial sex, right? And maybe fewer individuals of the changed sex. So in this case, you're going to tend to have more males in the population than fewer females, these dominant large females. In the case of sheephead, it's the opposite, where you have the really large individuals and old individuals are males. And you have a lot of females, fewer males. Okay, so here you have a dominant female. She's got her anemone, her little habitat, right? She guards and hangs out in. If that female dies, and you have a little non-dominant male, okay? Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. The male, a more dominant male, okay, is going to change into a female. So they have, these are some individuals that are sort of undifferentiated, and just here. And then you have a new male coming in, okay, and a dominant female within the anemone. So it's just, this is just showing a bit of the kind of social aspect. You're going to have a combo, you're going to have one dominant female on that anemone. Okay, they're very localized. They have these kind of small little territories, which is that. And then you're going to have some non-dominant males in the area. The maybe more dominant male is going to be the one that's going to be able to gain access to the female to mate. Okay, and will probably be the one that, if that female dies, will replace her in that area. Okay, we're getting there. So larval fish get nutrients from a yolk sac, typically. Okay. The mouth and digestive tract develop when the yolk sac is absorbed. This usually happens within the planktonic stage. Okay, once it's released and developing. The initial part. Yeah. Initially part of plankton. Yeah. So, sorry, I read that in a weird way. So they're in the plankton. They're using up that yolk sac until they get to a size or a developmental stage where they can actually feed themselves. Okay, and then they will, shortly after that stage, will typically settle onto a reef or whatever habitat they typically live in. And the timing of that varies a lot, and it's very species dependent and habitat dependent. Schooling we talked about a little bit last time, and we talked a little bit about the lateral line of fishes. Does anyone remember what the lateral line is? We looked at it in the...
You have pores that...
The little pores, yeah, that run the length of the body, typically.